evening and welcome to Tzutzes, a Parsha, Sparks, and Tidbits on the weekly Torah portion. This week's portion, Pinchas, is the second longest Torah portion, unless we count the double portions, which could be longer. But as far as a single portion is concerned, it is the second longest Torah Parsha, and the number of verses that it has is 168. And if someone is somewhat familiar with time, the number 168 reminds us of the week. A week contains within it 168 hours. Parshas Pinchas covers a lot of ground. It has reference to all the holidays, all the biblical holidays, and even the rabbinical holidays are hinted here and there in this section. But Pinchas covers holidays, it covers the weekdays, the daily sacrifice, it covers the Shabbos, and it covers all the hours of the week. And all of that is under the title of Pinchas. Who is this Pinchas, and what does he stand for? Well, before we go any further, Pinchas, the Zohar says, Ze Eliyahu. Pinchas and Elijah the prophet are one and the same. Although the name changed, it's still the same person. Pinchas and Eliyahu are the ones who, although it may seem strange based on what we read about them, but we'll get into that in a moment, are the ones who bring about change. Pinchas brought about a dramatic change. The Jewish people were going through a terrible period of pain and suffering as a result of the sinful behavior of members of the Jewish community, including one of their leaders, a man by the name of Zimri. And thousands of Jews were dying in a plague. Pinchas was the one, through his act of zealousness, where he killed the perpetrator of the crime, and as a result, God says in this week's Torah portion, my anger has been assuaged because of Pinchas, and I will therefore grant him my covenant of peace, an eternal covenant. So Pinchas is the one who saves the Jewish people. Eliyahu, Elijah, is the prophet who will come to announce the coming of Mashiach. He will introduce a radical change in the world, a change that will bring about universal peace. Pinchas brings peace. Eliyahu is the angel that brings peace. In fact, in the very last biblical book, the last prophetic biblical book, the book of Malachi, who was the last official prophet who lived at the beginning of the Second Temple era, at the very end of that book, it describes what Eliyahu Hanavi, is going to be doing when he arrives. V'heishiv lev avos abanim. He will restore the hearts of the fathers to the children, or the hearts of the fathers through the children. He will reunify families, bring ultimate peace, which is a forerunner of the Messianic age. So Pinchas and Eliyahu, they're the same person. They certainly represent the same ideal, just different ways of doing it. Pinchas's way of doing it is through fighting and defeating evil. Eliyahu's way is by embracing the positive within everyone. Pinchas, as we said before, committed an act of zealotry. That's what we read at the end of last week's Torah portion. Here's a man, Zimri, the leader of the tribe of Shimon, who's consorting almost publicly with a Midianite princess whose name was Cosby, defiantly trying to thwart and undermine the purity and the integrity of Jewish family life. Not only that, but the Midianite and Moabite women that were unleashed by their own leaders, their intention was not just to entice the Jewish men, but to get them to become idol worshippers. The worst possible sins were committed through this liaison of Zimri and Cosby. And Pinchas goes and commits this act of zealousness and spears the two of them. Most people would have said that this is a violent act, it was out of place, it was unauthorized, but the Torah tells us differently. That's how this week's Torah portion begins, that Pinchas, the son of Elazar, the son of Aaron the Kohen, turned back my wrath from upon the children of Israel, when he zealously avenged my vengeance among them. So I did not consume the children of Israel in my vengeance. Therefore, say, behold, this is God speaking, I give him my covenant of peace, and it shall be for him and his offspring after him a covenant of eternal priesthood, because he took vengeance for his God, and he atoned for the children of Israel. So here God is rewarding him for an act of violence. And what does he reward him with? The covenant of peace. It's like winning the Nobel Peace Prize after committing an act of violence. Now in today's day, we already saw how mass murderers can win the Nobel Peace Prize. But this is the divine Peace Prize, the real Nobel Peace Prize. And it was given to Pinchas because his intentions were totally pure, unmitigated devotion to saving the Jewish people. It was based on and generated and motivated by love for his own people. Sometimes an act can be committed that may look like it's a cruel act. We know what we call tough love, and we know that we call certain types of rebuke, certain types of discipline to be acts of kindness, because the intention sometimes in some people is to help the person, and sometimes you have to use harsh language, sometimes even more than harsh language, as it was the case with Pinchas. But the motivation was love. Now we have to be very careful with that. That's why the Torah tells us Pinchas was the son of Elazar, the son of Aaron. We already knew this, but as Rashi said, because the people who were criticizing him and implying that he did this out of his cruel nature, the Torah testifies that he was a descendant of Aaron. Aaron, who was known as the most loving human being. Oheb Shalom, he loved peace. He pursued peace. Oheb V'Sabrios, he loved everyone unconditionally, and he brought them close to the Torah. This Aaron's love for his fellow was translated into acts of violence in this particular case. But one has to be very careful, even when you're doing it and you're motivated by love, because sometimes it can go awry. Sometimes the person could receive it the wrong way and not feel the love there, and it can have negative consequences. So we have to be very careful and examine our behavior and think it over more than once to see, is this act of judgment, this act of discipline, going to have its intended effect, or maybe it will backfire. And we know from our experiences that many times it does. We always should err on the side of love, on the side of peace, on the side of seeing the good and accentuating the positive. As the Alter Rebbe says in chapter 32 of Tanya, the heart of Tanya, that if you try to influence someone using tough love, if it doesn't work, you accomplish nothing. But if you try to help a person with overt love, even if you don't succeed, you at least fulfill the mitzvah of loving your fellow as yourself. There's a midrash that says that Pinchas was given a reward, but the explicit statement here is that he would have this eternal covenant. As Rashi explains, that up until that time, Pinchas, though he was the son of Elazar and Aaron, the priest, the Kohanim, he was not destined to be a Kohen. But because of what he did here, God gave him and his descendants the distinction that they would also be Kohanim, they would also be priests. But there's another midrash that says that the reward that Pinchas was given is that a letter Yud was added to his name. The word Pinchas could be spelled without a Yud, as it is in some cases, or with a Yud. The Yud was inserted to his name as a reward for his act of bravery and self-sacrifice. We also find, much earlier in the Torah, that Joseph, when he resisted the advances of Potiphar's wife, that as a reward, he is referred to in the book of Psalms as not Yosef, but Yehosef. An extra Hey was added to his name. Now the Yud and the Hey are both letters of God's name. Why is it that Yosef got the Hey for an act of resistance against immorality, and Pinchas got a letter Yud for an act of resistance? Well, one could say that the Yud is holier than the Hey. It's the first letter, and Yosef was only passive. Well, he did run out, but he didn't actively do something. It was not a proactive thing. It was a passive, more or less resisting the advances of Potiphar's wife. In the case of Pinchas, it was more proactive and more dangerous on his part to do what he did. But there's another way of explaining the difference between the Yud and the Hey. Our sages tell us that God created the world with those two letters. This world, the physical world, the temporal world, the world of constraints of space and time, he created with the letter Hey. Hey is like the breath that comes out of your mouth. He created this world, so to speak, with his divine breath. The Yud, the little letter Yud, which is a higher level, that's what he uses for the world to come, the future. And actually the letter Yud, whenever it's put in front of a word, it implies future tense. Whereas Hey is the initial of the word Hove, present tense, or something that is bound by time, whereas the Yud represents something that transcends time. What's the difference between Pinchas and Yosef? Yosef, how did he resist the temptation? So the Talmud tells us that he saw the image of his father in the window, and that's what got him the strength to resist the temptation. What does that mean? There are times when we learn how to behave properly. We go against the grain. We go against our own temptations because we think about our past. We think about our father and mother. We think about our ancestors, our forebears, and how we're betraying them by deviating from their ways of life. So that keeps us straight by recognizing where we come from. What is our place in this world? That's the letter Hey. Whereas Yud implies the future. Pinchas is a man of the future. Pinchas, as we said before, is Eliyahu, is Elijah. He's the one, the prophet that will come in the future and announce and herald the future redemption. Elijah is a man of the world to come. He's not part of this world. He transcends the limits of time and space. He doesn't die. He goes alive into paradise. So Pinchas was a man who looked into the future, and of the two, that's the superior approach. There's two ways we could motivate ourselves to do the right thing. One is to say, look at our glorious past, look at our connection to Mount Sinai, and let us not sever our ties with Mount Sinai and all the links in between. But a superior approach is to look into the future. We're soon, very soon, going to enter into the Messianic age. We're going to be living in a perfect and ideal world, a world of truth, a world of holiness, a world of purity and goodness. And we have to be ready for that. We have to prepare for that and live that way today. How then could we possibly not take the initiative to do what's right, to thwart whatever influences that are negative? Pinchas is a man of the future and uses the future to affect the present. Joseph was someone who had to use the past and the present to affect the present. One more thought on this week's Parsha. We have the names of the victims or the perpetrators. The Midianite, it says, and it uses the name Zimri. The Midianite woman, and her name is Cosbi, and she's the daughter of Sur. Why is that relevant here? Why do we have to know that? So one commentator says, there's a hint over here. In Ethics of the Fathers, it says that the world is based on three traits: on truth, peace, and on judgment, justice. The word Midian comes from a root that means quarreling, discord. It's the opposite of peace. The word Cosbi comes from a Hebrew word kozev, which means falsehood, the opposite of truth. Sur is a rock, which is a symbol of justice. And here it was the opposite of justice. By Pinchas eliminating this Midianite Cosbi, Basur, he was again instituting and reinforcing the three pillars upon which the world stands, on peace, truth, and justice. May Hashem help us that we should have a good Shabbos and a good week. We're living in the 3 weeks right now when we commemorate the events that led to the destruction of the temple, but by learning Torah, specifically by learning the laws of the sacrifices, the building of the temple, this will help to remove the negatives and hasten the redemption. May it be imminent. Have a good Shabbos and a good week.